Welcome to a new edition of Talking in Sam's Car. Today is January 12th, but I'm probably not going to post this until January 13th. I've gotten a little bit ahead because I recorded 2 videos yesterday instead of the usual one. And in case you watched yesterday's video and the one before it, I'm wearing the same jacket but a different shirt because I'd have to had a shower since the last video. Just thought you might like to know that in case you don't want to associate with somebody that doesn't shower very often. Anywho, today I decided that instead of talking about inductive reasoning, that I would talk about sensory perception and our knowledge of the external world. And the reason I decided to do this, I'm trying to talk about all these different methods of knowing in a kind of a logical order. And so what I'm starting at is, I started with the foundation, and then the foundation was knowledge by, I can't think of the word. What is the word? I want to say introspection. Intuition, that's the word I was looking for. Knowledge by intuition. And then based on the things that we know by intuition, like the laws of logic, then we're able to reason deductively, and that gives us a certain kind of knowledge. But one of the criteria for deciding the order in which I'm presenting this information is to go from the most certain to the least certain. And so obviously, whatever is at the foundation has to be the most certain, because no conclusion can be more certain than the premises that it's based on. So if we're basing our deductive reasoning on what we know by intuition, then intuition has to be more reliable than deductive reasoning. I know that seems counterintuitive to a lot of you, but if you think about it, it's true. So deductive reasoning also gives us a certain level of certainty depending on how clearly we see these laws of logic and how true our premises are and stuff like that. Inductive reasoning is a less certain thing, but I decided to do the external world and sensory perception before inductive reasoning. And the reason is because a lot of things that we reason about inductively, like we reason about the boiling point of water, like, it's experience or whatever of having boiled water, that we learn what temperature it usually boils at. And we learn that by our sensory perception. So it seems to me that sensory perception is logically prior to inductive reasoning. And I guess you could say sensory perception in a way is also logically prior to deductive reasoning. So I could have done this before deductive reasoning, because in deductive reasoning, you need the premises to be true. And a lot of times those premises are things about the external world. Like I talked about rain. You couldn't know it was raining or anything about the way water works if it weren't for your sensory perceptions. Our sensory perceptions are, if you think about it, almost everything we know about the physical world around us, we know through our sensory perceptions. Sight, taste, touch, sound, smell, and gravity. We also have a sixth sense. We can tell up from down. We do that with our inner ears. Anyway, I don't know why they don't talk about that one. But anyway, so when I was a kid, I was in the 2nd grade, and I was riding the bus to school one day. And I remember thinking about how a couple of years earlier, when I was in kindergarten or 1st grade, I think I was in the 1st grade, I used to walk home from school. The school was only like 2 blocks away from my house, and I used to walk home. And there was a tennis court between the school and the house. And I remember one time climbing under the bushes near the tennis court and falling asleep. And I was when I was in the 2nd grade, I was sitting on the bus, and I was thinking about this, remembering it. And I was like, I don't remember waking up. And so I started thinking, what if this is all a dream? What if none of this is real? And so there was a 3rd grade kid sitting beside me on the school bus, and I started talking to him about it. I said, what if all of this is a dream and none of this is real? And he thought that was a neat idea. And so we started playing this game And we started saying, well, what if it's possible that we're asleep, then it's possible that we've always been asleep. What if like that whole incident where I fell asleep at the tennis court, what if I dreamed that? What if the whole thing has been a dream? In which case, I don't really even know that I'm a human being. And so we started playing this game where we'd point out the window, there was a horse out in the pasture, and it was like, I could be that horse out there for all I know. Or I could, and and every time we saw an animal or something, one of us would point to it and say, well, I could be that animal, or whatever. So this whole problem of the external world, as it's known in philosophy, was something that kind of loomed large in my thinking throughout my childhood. And when I got to be a teenager, I remember thinking at one point, well, for all practical purposes, it doesn't really matter, because even if this is a dream, it's not like I can escape it. I still have to kind of live in reality. If you drop a brick on my foot, it'll still hurt. So I might as well pretend or whatever that it's real. Well, it wasn't until I got to my late 20s that I realized I don't have to pretend that this is real, and I don't have to be agnostic about whether it's real. All I have to do is be totally honest with myself. When I'm totally honest with myself about what I believe in the external world. I believe that my senses are giving me true information about a world that really exists. And I think, although I can't prove that the external world exists, I nevertheless am not really entertaining any serious doubts about it. And I suspect that's true of you too. There are a handful of people out there who are idealists and stuff. I'm a little bit suspicious whenever I run into somebody who claims that either that they don't know that the external world exists or they're in doubts about it. So when I was in my freshman year of college, which was 4 years after most people because I was in the military for 4 years, I took an introduction to philosophy class, and I read Rene Descartes' Meditations on First Philosophy for the first time. Well, that's a lot of firsts. First, yeah. Anyway, and he did this thought experiment where he imagined that there's an evil genius or an evil demon who's tricking you, and he's giving you these perceptions and stuff. And so he said anything. He kind of did what I'm doing in this series of videos, but he used a different procedure. He was trying to get to an indubitable starting point, something that it was impossible to doubt. Since it's possible that the evil genius is tricking us about our senses, then it's possible to doubt the entire external world. Because if you think about it, we don't really perceive anything directly. What happens is, in the case of visual perception, light bounces off of things, goes into our eye, gets flipped upside down, hits the back of our eye. That gets turned into like an electrical chemical signal that goes through an optic nerve into the brain, and somehow through some kind of magic, the brain creates an image that we can see in our mind. So what's really happening is you're not seeing the tree directly. You're not even seeing the photons coming from that tree directly. What you're seeing is an image created by your brain. And so it's really everything you see is a perception. And so there were some philosophers like George Berkeley who argued that if you can account for everything in the physical world by appeal to just perception, then if you use Occam's razor, there's no reason to think there's an external world at all. It's all perception. And so I think George Berkeley was one of the first idealists. That's one of the arguments for idealism, which I'm going to deal with in a future video. But so anyway, the external world is not something that you can prove that exists. And in the past, when I've talked to people about this, they'll say something like, some people will say something like, well, of course we can. If I see a yellow house and my buddy sees the same yellow house, there's probably a yellow house, because what are the chances that both of us would be seeing, what are the chances that both of us would be having the same illusion? That's unlikely. And the more people you have corroborate what you see, the more reasonable you are in seeing it. Well, if you think it, I'm surprised that people make that argument, because it's so obviously circular reasoning. How do they know that anybody perceives anything? They only know that through their own perceptions. The only reason you know that your buddy is sitting there confirming anything to you is because you use your sensory organs to tell that you've got a buddy there. It's through your hearing that you hear what he says, your eyes that you can see him and stuff like that. So you're appealing to something in your own perceptions in order to prove something in your perceptions, which is circular reasoning. So the bottom line is, the external world, the whole physical world, is impossible. It is impossible to prove that it exists. It's impossible to prove that anything exists outside of your own mind. Now, I said earlier that apart from our senses, we almost can't know anything. Well, there are some things we can know. Like, I can know that there are no married bachelors in the external world, and I know that because a married bachelor is a contradiction in terms. And as we talked about in a previous video, there are no contradictions in reality. If you perceive a contradiction in reality, then you've made a mistake. It isn't. Anyway, I don't want to go into that again. I already talked about all that. So this is an interesting epistemological point, because what it shows is that we are rational and reasonable in believing things, some things, at least a handful of things, without being able to prove them. And that was true of everything that lies at the foundation of our knowledge. One of the things that lies at the foundation of our knowledge is this idea that our senses are giving us true information about the world. That piece of information is hardwired into us, which is evident in the fact that we don't reason our way into believing the external world. Nobody looks at a cat and says, well, I'm perceiving what appears to be a cat, and since my senses are reliable, my senses give me true information about the world, therefore there must be a cat. That's not how it happens. The way it actually happens is you see a cat, and upon seeing the cat, you automatically form the belief there's a cat. And so it happens automatically, which means this information about the reliability of our sensory perceptions is hardwired into us. It's hardwired into everybody. And that's true even of idealists, because even idealists don't stop perceiving the world as if it's real. And so my philosophy about the external world and things like that is, I'm what's called a common sense realist. I think that if your sensory perceptions present something to you in a way that seems very real, it's always more reasonable to affirm the obvious than to deny the obvious. Now, there are cases where your senses fool you. There are illusions, dreams, mirages, hallucinations. There are ways that your senses deceive you. But the mere fact that your senses sometimes deceive you is no reason to think that the entire external world doesn't even exist, or that you can't know that it exists. I think you can know that it exists. So, yeah, there you have it. Sensory perception.